Hello and welcome to the first video of our new Read Aloud series, The Graduation of Jake Moon, written by Barbara Park. Now, for many of you, if that author's name sounds familiar, even though the title may not, she is the author of all the Junie B. Jones books. Now, while those Junie B. books that you may have enjoyed when you were younger, and maybe even still enjoy today, they're great reads, those were usually pretty fun and lighthearted and just generally kind of silly. That's not this book. We do have a piece of realistic fiction, which means even though everything in this book is made up, it's all realistic enough that it could actually happen. So this is a big change from some of the other books that we've read this year, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that was a work of fantasy. And so as we get into this book, we're going to see things that you might have an easier time connecting to with those personal experiences where you can think, hey, I've done that before, or I've felt that way before. You may find it easier to make those personal connections throughout this story with the plot being a little bit more grounded. Now, before we get into this, you may have already noticed before you clicked on this that this video is much shorter than our typical read aloud videos. We'll talk about why when we get done with today's section, which you'll see is very, very short. So let's dive right in. The Graduation of Jake Moon by Barbara Park. This is going to follow a young boy named Jake Moon, as you might have predicted. And it's going to just kind of tell his story from very early in age up through his 8th grade year in middle school. So let's begin. So there are these three 8th grade boys. They'd just gotten out of school for the day, and they're about to take off in different directions when they notice something going on in the trash dumpster at the other end of the parking lot. They're still pretty far away from it, but they can see an old man sitting on the edge of the thing. His back is facing them, and he just sort of balanced himself there, staring down into the bottom of the dumpster. The boys watch him for a second, and then one of them starts grinning, and he cups his hands around his mouth and shouts out, "Hey, don't jump, Pops, you've got everything to live for." Then one of the other boys yells, "Yeah, plus I heard the food is much better at the dumpster up the street." So after that, both kids totally crack up, and it becomes this contest, sort of, to see who can holler out the funniest insults at the old guy. Like the first kid asked the old man if he went to PU University, and then the second kid asked if he has any of that Grey Poupon mustard. But the third kid, see, he's just standing there not saying a word. Instead, his eyes are glued to the old guy almost, like he's waiting for a reaction. Only that's the thing, because there is no reaction. Not at first, anyway. At first, the old man never even turns around, so the boys begin to think that maybe the guy's deaf or something, which totally takes the fun out of shouting insults at him. But then, out of the blue, something seems to click in the old man's brain. I mean, even from the back, you can see his head sort of like perk up, you know? It's like he gets it now. He suddenly understands that all this yelling has been directed at him. And so he lowers himself down into the trash dumpster, and then he turns around to see who's been talking to him. And that's pretty much that. The fun is over. Because even from the other end of the parking lot, it's obvious to the boys that there's something really wrong with the old guy. That he's just not right in the head. Instead of acting mad or angry or even insulted, his face actually brightens, and he waves as friendly as anything and shouts, "Hello, fellas." And it's so pathetic, I can't even tell you. The two boys shut up after that. I mean, they chuckle a little bit and all, but you can tell they're not exactly busting with pride over making fun of a messed up old man. But see, the third kid, the one who kept quiet, he doesn't have anything to be ashamed about at all, right? Because like I said, he didn't do anything. So if you happen to be passing by and you saw this whole thing going on, you'd probably think that the third kid was the good kid, that he was the one with a conscience or some sense of decency or something. Only that's the weird thing about this story. That's the twist, I guess you'd call it. On account of the third kid, turned out to be the most shameful of all. Because the third kid was me. And the old man in the dumpster, well, that was my grandfather. And we're actually going to stop there for today's read aloud video in terms of where we go in the story, because I want to take a moment to talk about something that we've covered in writing this year. And that's how we start just about any piece of writing you can imagine, and that's with a hook, something to get the reader's attention, and boy does Barbara Park do that in this story. where it sets up something that pretty much everyone can relate to. Even if you haven't quite made it to 8th grade yet, I think all of us at one time or another, whether you want to admit it or not, maybe have made fun of someone else, said some nice things, or said some not so nice things about them. Particularly those of you that have siblings, you don't necessarily always get along. And maybe from the other end of things, like from the old man in the dumpster, maybe you can relate to being made fun of. So like I said before we started reading, this story, it offers a lot more opportunities to really connect to the story in a personal way. And in just 2 pages, Barbara Park has set a scene that I think everyone can connect to. And it creates so many questions. Like, my goodness, like I said at the end, this third kid that didn't say anything, he's sitting there letting his own grandfather get made fun of by these 2 other kids that he's walking with. What would have to happen to sour a relationship with a grandparent to the point that you have no interest in standing up for them? That you allow these kids to make fun of them. And even when he's obviously something's wrong, and we don't know what yet, we'll find that out in future Read Aloud videos as the story goes on. But as Jake is walking along, with him as our narrator, why wouldn't he do anything to help when it's family? And like we often say in class, even if you don't always like your family, deep down you still always love your family. That even when you might be having some conflicts and arguments and you're not necessarily getting along 100% of the time, deep down you still love each other and you would have their back if they needed you. But boy, Jake just let it happen. And that is exactly what a hook is supposed to do. Just a very brief beginning to the story, just 2 pages out of over 100. And she's created a situation where most readers or listeners are thinking, whoa, wouldn't have expected that. I want to see what happens. And that's what good writing does. That's exactly what Barbara Park has done here with her hook. She's gotten your attention. So I hope you'll come back for our second Read Aloud video as we continue the graduation of Jake Moon.